Hey there, and welcome to the YouTube channel for the Renaissance English History Podcast. My name is Heather. I have been podcasting on Tudor England since 2009, and this channel is where I put all of my old videos, old episodes, and new episodes from all of my shows, as well as extra content like this video you're watching right here. Today, we are going to talk about Elizabeth I's love life and her many international suitors. She was an international woman of mystery. I'm kind of mad right now because I actually just said all of this like 10 minutes ago, and I stopped and I went to hit stop recording and I realized I hadn't been recording. So here we are again. And the thing is, it's a bummer because in the middle of recording the other one, I got a phone call from the delivery company, the freight company for my tutor planners, and was setting up the delivery for that. So that was kind of fun to have that on tape, only it wasn't on tape. So we're doing it again. We're doing it again, guys, and it's going to be for the second time around, or I'm going to have less patience. This is like the worst. I hate it when that happens. Anyway, we're talking today about Elizabeth I and her love life. So, of course, the Elizabethan era is one of the most fascinating periods in history, and she was known as the Virgin Queen, yet that was not without its challenges. Her hand in marriage was sought by dukes, by kings, by nobles. It was the stuff of legend. Suitors from across the European continent, as far abroad as Russia, sought Elizabeth's hand in marriage, at least up until the 1570s. And then it became clear she wasn't going to get married. And it did, her romances stayed going, but that was the height of it. So, in an age where marriages were not just personal unions, but political strategies, Elizabeth's marital status became the talk and intrigue of royal courts. She found herself in a constant dance, gracefully balancing proposals of love, alliance, and her ever persistent call of duty. Guys, this second time around, it's like much more animated. All right, let's start with Philip II of Spain. So, Philip II is an interesting one because, of course, he had been married to Mary, Elizabeth's sister, which is weird. But, of course, Mary's own mother, Catherine of Aragon, had first been married to Henry VIII's brother, Arthur. So, weird things happened all the time in the 16th century. Weird things happen today. Weirder things have happened. So, he was among the first to propose to the new English queen, and his motivation was clear. He and Mary had established Catholicism, again, reestablished Catholicism in England, and he wanted to hang on to that. He also wanted to have, can you imagine they were always at war with France, right? Going back and forth. If he had England on that side, it would circle France essentially, keep England within the Catholic fold, maintain this kind of strategic alliance. But of course, Elizabeth, ever the diplomat, demurred and declined. The rejection was not just personal, but it carried profound political implications. It marked a clear shift in England's religious and political trajectory away from Catholic Spain. The hopes of a Catholic England, held by Philip, began while he was married to Mary, would wane. And then over the years, this initial suitor would then evolve from a potential romantic partner to one of Elizabeth's most formidable adversaries. Then, of course, there was Archduke Charles of Austria. He hailed from the Habsburg Empire, which dominated European politics. And the match was, endorsed by William Cecil. It had the potential to be a very significant diplomatic move, bolstering England's position in Europe by aligning with the House of Habsburg. Archduke Charles represented stability and influence. There was genuine interest from both sides. Elizabeth is quoted to have said that Charles was the only man who made her feel like a woman. Ooh, fancy. The two exchanged portraits, which was a personal gesture. And Charles even began learning English, which kind of reminds me of the scene in Love Actually where Colin Firth learns Portuguese and Aurora, is that her name? Ariel, forget her name. Aurelia. Aurelia learns English just in cases. Love that movie. Anyway, Charles began learning English just in cases. But the religious differences caused some problems. He was Catholic, and his closeness with the Pope there were concerns about that and about the idea of England returning to Catholicism under his influence. And so negotiations dragged on. Elizabeth became wary of committing to a foreign prince and the potential entanglement in continental politics. Charles was left heartbroken, returning to his territories without an English queen by his side. Then, you guys, we have Ivan the Terrible. I find this so fascinating because it comes from one of my favorite episodes in Elizabethan England, which was the search for the Northeast Passage. Everybody else was looking for the Northwest Passage, and this group with Richard Chancellor and some other fellows formed a company, and they thought they would go up north and then turn right instead of left and head east and see what was there, because maybe that would be a shortcut. Spoiler alert, it didn't work because #geography. But I did do an episode on it. I've talked about it a lot. Richard Chancellor appears in my novel too. And so there's that. And I get very sidetracked and very excited when I talk about the Northeast Passage. It's one of those episodes that I very much geek out on because it's people doing something different, which I think is cool. And so yeah, it didn't work out, but it did lead to a very big trade alliance. And that's what the initial discussions between Elizabeth and Ivan were about, was their trade. And it opened up trade routes and all this other kind of stuff for England. So they initially started writing back and forth about like how they were going to trade with each other, trading rights, fishing rights, stuff like that. And then it turned romantic, and Ivan floated the idea of a potential marriage. The idea was politically tempting. It would have opened up more trade routes, been a counterbalance to the Habsburg and Spanish dominance. But there were considerable cultural and religious differences, not to mention Ivan's tumultuous reputation. Stories of his temper and unpredictable behavior were legendary. Elizabeth diplomatically declined his offer, though she did maintain cordial relations, establishing the foundations of an Anglo-Russian relationship that would continue to evolve in the coming centuries. But yeah, it was a very important relationship for England that started because of taking a wrong turn. Then we move on to Sweden. Sweden's Eric the 14th, a passionate and mercurial king, was among Elizabeth's earliest royal suitors. He actually proposed to her when she was still a princess. And it was kind of not a good move because he should have asked Mary first, but he just went straight to Elizabeth. And the idea of an Anglo-Swedish alliance was intriguing because both countries were becoming Protestant. They had some shared rivals, but Eric's courtship was relentless, almost obsessive. He sent Elizabeth lavish gifts, and he wrote her numerous passionate letters. In one, he suggested that they could live together like doves. And Elizabeth entertained his proposals without committing. He even sent his sister Cecilia over to plead his case. But there were stories coming out of Sweden of his increasing paranoia. He was doing things like imprisoning and executing nobles without any cause at all. And that kind of put her off. The final blow to their courtship came when Eric was deposed, and that was the end of that. He was eventually, spoiler alert, poisoned by some pea soup, so they say. I mean, he was poisoned. They exhumed him and found that it was a lethal dose of arsenic. And apparently it was the pea soup. It reminds me of Harry Potter when he was riding the night bus on the way. I think it was Harry Potter 3, and he was riding the night bus, and the guy said, "Oh, the leaky cauldron. Don't get the pea soup or eat it before it eats you." See, so pea soup just legendarily has this whole, just, I don't know, don't eat pea soup. Anyway, I digress. Second time around, you guys, things go wonky on the second time around. Now we're going to talk about Francis, the Duke of Anjou and Alençon, representing Elizabeth's most controversial, at least controversial foreign suitor, and one of her most publicized courtships. He was a member of the French royal family. He was 20 years her junior. Go her. He visited Elizabeth's court in the 1570s. Their relationship was filled with flirtations, with Elizabeth affectionately nicknaming him the Frog. Politically, the alliance would have been a strategic move against Spain, but there were numerous hurdles: the significant age difference and the religious differences. He was Catholic. This was the 1570s, leading up to the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in Paris, which was when a lot of Protestants got killed. So the relationships between the Catholics and Protestants, not good. And the English were generally suspicious of a French match. And also, William Cecil was against the match. They did share a genuine affection with each other, but it became increasingly clear that marriage was not in the cards. Francis eventually left England, heartbroken, still carrying a torch for Elizabeth, and the two continued to correspond until his death in 1584. Very sad. The domestic suitors, marrying domestically was always going to be hard for any queen because you would be effectively lifting up one of the noble families above the other and above all the others, and people weren't going to like that, right? So any decision you made about marrying domestically was going to be hard. So Robert Dudley, of course, was her great love and probably the great love story of her life. And they'd known each other since childhood. They'd spent time in the Tower after Wyatt's rebellion with each other. He was a Dudley, so we did a episode on Epsom and Dudley a couple weeks ago, and then we talked about John Dudley and how he tried to arrange the match with Guilford Dudley. Like, all the Dudleys had their hands in things, and so that made them quite unpopular. William Cecil was against the match, and of course, Robert Dudley had been married to Amy Robsart, who died very mysteriously. And you should check out a woman who comes to TutorCon, Jill McCracken. She has a podcast called The Murder Shelf. What's it called? The Murder Shelf podcast. The Murder Shelf book podcast, I think it's called. And it's on true crime. And she actually just did a series, or has a series coming out, on who killed Amy Robsart. So I'll link to that. You should check it out. But Jill's fun. And so, of course, she wasn't going to be able to marry Robert Dudley. He had too much baggage. But they did stay close friends and, probably in love until the day he died in 1588. She kept his last letter to her, labeled his last letter, until her own death. And, this was probably the person that she would have chosen to marry if she could have. There were other stories then of other people. Walter Raleigh was mentioned. Christopher Hatton was another public servant and favorite of the queen. She called him her lid, like her eyelids, her eyes. Um, but their relationship stayed platonic. And Hatton was absolutely devoted to her, but he never pursued marriage with her, understanding the constraints of her position. Then there was also Essex. There were a couple other domestic ones that were talked about, but Robert Dudley was the main one. So there we have it, a little journey through Elizabeth's love life. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did and you got through and you enjoyed it, I sure would appreciate a press of that like button and a subscription to my channel, where I put out videos like this a lot. It used to be almost every day, but I'm working a lot these days. So not every day, but several times a week. All right. Thank you so much for watching. You are deeply loved and deeply appreciated. I'm so glad I share a planet with you. And don't forget to drink your water. I'll be back soon.